May 6, 1937. Lakehurst, New Jersey. The largest aircraft ever built glides toward the landing field after crossing the Atlantic Ocean. Inside, passengers sip champagne and gaze out windows at the American landscape below. They have no idea that in exactly 37 minutes, most of them will be fighting for their lives. This is the Hindenburg, a floating palace in the sky. 804 feet long, filled with 7 million cubic feet of hydrogen gas, and in just 37 seconds, it will become a raging inferno that changes aviation history forever. What you're about to witness is not just a disaster. It's a story of unimaginable courage, split-second decisions, and the shocking fact that most people actually survived. Before we begin, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because the true story of the Hindenburg is far more incredible than you've ever been told. To understand what happened on that terrible evening in 1937, you need to understand what the Hindenburg was. This wasn't just an airship. This was the future of travel, the Concorde of its era. A technological miracle that seemed to promise a new age of luxury air transportation. Built in Germany and launched in 1936, the LZ-129 Hindenburg was named after Paul von Hindenburg, the former president of the Weimar Republic. It was the pride of Nazi Germany, a propaganda tool showcasing German engineering superiority to the world. Adolf Hitler himself attended its maiden voyage ceremonies, though he never flew on it. He was terrified of flying, but for those who could afford a ticket, and it wasn't cheap, roughly $450 in 1937, equivalent to about $9,000. Today, the Hindenburg was pure luxury. Imagine this. You board at Frankfurt, Germany. You walk through a corridor into passenger cabins decorated with fine fabrics and polished wood. Your private room has real beds, not airplane seats. There's a dining room serving gourmet meals on fine china. A lounge with a grand piano. A smoking room, yes. You could smoke on a hydrogen-filled airship, though it was sealed and pressurized. There was even a bar. And the windows? Floor-to-ceiling windows that opened, letting you lean out and feel the wind as you floated over the Atlantic at 78 miles per hour. The journey from Germany to New York took about 2.5 days. Compare that to ocean liners, which took a week. The Hindenburg wasn't just transportation, it was an experience. By May 1937, the Hindenburg had completed 10 round trips to the United States without incident. Passengers loved it. The wealthy, the famous, the adventurous, they all wanted to fly on the Hindenburg. It seemed invincible. But there was a problem. A dangerous problem that every engineer knew about but chose to accept. The Hindenburg was designed to be filled with helium, a non-flammable, inert gas. Safe. But helium was expensive and, more importantly, the United States controlled most of the Kominternster, world's helium supply, and they refused to sell it to Nazi Germany. So the Germans made a calculated risk. They filled their airship with hydrogen instead. Hydrogen is the lightest element in the universe. It provides excellent lift. But it has one terrifying characteristic. It's extremely flammable. One spark, one static discharge, and 7 million cubic feet of hydrogen could turn into a bomb. The engineers knew this. The crew knew this. But the Hindenburg had made dozens of flights. Nothing had gone wrong. They believed they had it under control. They were wrong. On May 3, 1937, the Hindenburg departed Frankfurt, Germany, bound for Lakehurst Naval Air Station in New Jersey. On board were 36 passengers and 61 crew members, 97 souls total. The passengers included businessmen, tourists, and a few notable figures. There was Ernst Lehmann, the airship's designer, and one of Germany's most experienced airship captains. There was Joseph Spey, an acrobat traveling with his dog. And there was Werner Franz, a 14-year-old cabin boy on his first flight. The journey across the Atlantic was routine. Passengers played cards, enjoyed meals, and marveled at the view. Children ran up and down the corridors. Everything seemed perfect. But as the Hindenburg approached New Jersey on the afternoon of May 6th, the weather turned. Thunderstorms rolled in. Lightning crackled across the sky. The ship's captain, Max Pruss, decided to delay landing until the storms passed. For hours, the Hindenburg circled over New York and New Jersey, waiting for clearance. Finally, at around 7 p.m., the weather began to improve. Captain Pruss received permission to land. The massive airship approached Lakehurst Naval Air Station, slowly, carefully. On the ground, over 200 people waited: ground crew, reporters, newsreel, cameramen, and excited family members. Among them was Herb Morrison, a radio reporter from Chicago's WLS station. He was there to record a routine arrival report. He stood with his recording equipment, watching the giant ship descend. At 7:21 p.m., the Hindenburg dropped its mooring lines. Ground crew grabbed them and began pulling the airship down to the landing mast. Everything was proceeding normally. And then, at 7:25 p.m., someone on the ground noticed something strange. A flicker of light near the tail section, a small ripple in the fabric skin, and then fire. It started at the tail, near the upper fin, a small flame no bigger than a campfire. But within 2 seconds, the entire rear section of the Hindenburg exploded into a massive fireball. The hydrogen gas ignited. 7 million cubic feet of it, and this is where Herb Morrison's voice becomes part of history. It's burst into flames. Get out of the way! Get out of the way! Get this, Charlie! Get this, Charlie! It's fire and it's crashing! It's crashing terrible! Oh, my! Get out of the way! Please! It's burning and bursting into sky! Flames and, oh, the humanity! Oh, the humanity! Those 3 words would become forever linked to this disaster. Morrison wasn't reading from a script. He was watching people die in real time, and his voice cracked with genuine anguish. You can hear him sobbing as he tries to continue reporting. It's one of the most raw, emotional pieces of audio journalism ever recorded. From the moment the fire started to the moment the Hindenburg hit the ground, 37 seconds. That's all it took for the largest aircraft in the world to become a twisted, burning skeleton. Inside, passengers and crew had no time to think. The tail dropped first, sending people tumbling toward the back of the ship. Some grabbed onto railings, some fell. The heat was unimaginable over 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit. The aluminum framework began to melt, the fabric skin disintegrated. But here's what's remarkable, what most people don't know. In those 37 seconds of absolute chaos, human beings made split-second decisions that saved their lives. Some passengers jumped. The Hindenburg was still about 100 feet in the air when the fire started, but as it dropped, that distance decreased rapidly. Some people waited until the ship was just 20 or 30 feet from the ground, low enough to survive a jump, and they leaped into the air. They hit the ground hard, breaking bones, but they survived. Others rode the ship down. The passenger cabins were located in the belly of the airship, underneath the main hydrogen cells. As the fire consumed the upper structure, some of the lower sections remained briefly intact. When the Hindenburg collapsed, some passengers found themselves inside a falling cage of burning metal. They scrambled through windows, through gaps in the wreckage, crawling over molten aluminum and shattered glass. And then there were the crew members. Many of them were deep inside the ship when the fire started. They had to navigate through an inferno, through smoke so thick they couldn't see, through corridors that were collapsing around them. 14-year-old Werner Franz, the cabin boy, was in the ship's storage area when the fire began. He heard the explosion, felt the ship tilt. He ran toward an exit but was surrounded by flames. Then, a miracle, a water tank above him burst from the heat, drenching him completely. That water-soaked boy ran through fire and jumped from the wreckage. He survived. Joseph Spey, the acrobat, used his training. As the ship fell, he hung from a window frame, judging the distance to the ground. At the perfect moment, no more than 15 feet up, he let go. He hit the sand, rolled, and ran. He survived. Captain Max Pruss stayed at his post, trying to maintain control even as the ship disintegrated around him. When he finally abandoned ship, he was severely burned. But he survived. Now, let's talk about the people on the ground, because what they did next defines the very best of human courage. When the Hindenburg exploded, The natural human instinct is to run away from the fire, and that's exactly what the crowd did at first. Hundreds of people scattered, running for their lives as burning debris fell from the sky. But then, something extraordinary happened. Some of them stopped running. They turned around, and they ran back toward the inferno. Navy personnel, ground crew members, civilians. They saw people stumbling out of the wreckage, on fire, screaming for help. And without hesitation, without protective gear, without any thought for their own safety, they ran into the flames. They pulled people from the burning wreckage. They beat out flames with their bare hands. They carried injured passengers away from the fire. Some of them suffered burns themselves. One ground crew member died trying to save others. One witness later described seeing a man emerge from the flames, his clothes burned off, his skin blackened. He took 3 steps and collapsed. 2 sailors ran to him, grabbed him under the arms, and dragged him to safety. That man survived because 2 strangers risked their lives for him. In total, the disaster lasted less than a minute from start to finish. By 7:26 p.m., the Hindenburg was a smoking ruin on the ground. The fire continued to burn for hours, but the immediate catastrophe was over. So here's the question everyone asks: how many people died? The answer shocks most people. Out of 97 people on board, 36 passengers and 61 crew, 62 survived. 62. That's almost 2/3. 35 people on the Hindenburg died, 13 passengers and 22 crew members. 1 additional person on the ground was killed by falling debris. 36 total fatalities. Now, don't misunderstand, 36 deaths is a tragedy. Each one of those lives mattered. But when you watch that footage, when you see that massive fireball, when you hear Herb Morrison screaming, "Oh, the humanity," you assume everyone died. Most people think the Hindenburg disaster killed hundreds of people, but the survival rate was actually 64%. How is that possible? Several factors contributed to the surprisingly high survival rate. First, the Hindenburg was low when it caught fire. If the explosion had happened at cruising altitude, everyone would have died. But it was already descending, less than 100 feet off the ground. That gave people a chance, a slim chance, but a chance to escape. Second, the hydrogen burned upward. Hydrogen is lighter than air, so when it ignited, the flames shot upward and outward. The passenger compartments were at the bottom of the ship. For those critical first few seconds, people in the lower sections were beneath the worst of the fire. Third, the ship fell relatively slowly. Yes, it came down fast by normal standards, but it didn't just drop like a rock. The remaining unignited hydrogen provided some lift, cushioning the descent slightly. That gave people inside a few extra seconds to react. Fourth, adrenaline, pure survival instinct. People did things they never thought possible. They jumped from heights that should have killed them. They ran through fire. They climbed over burning metal. Fear and adrenaline gave them superhuman ability for those crucial seconds. But not everyone made it. Some passengers hesitated. They waited too long, hoping the crew would save them. By the time they tried to escape, the exit was blocked by flames. Others were knocked unconscious in the initial explosion and never had a chance. And some survived the fire only to die later from their injuries, severe burns, smoke inhalation, internal trauma. One passenger, a businessman named Otto Clemens, walked away from the wreck with minor burns. He seemed fine, but he had inhaled superheated air that burned his lungs. He died the next morning in the hospital. That's the cruel reality of fire disasters. Sometimes the people who look okay are the ones in the most danger. So what caused the fire? That question has been debated for nearly 90 years. Immediately after the disaster, investigators from the United States and Germany launched separate inquiries. Both reached similar conclusions. The fire was caused by a static electricity discharge that ignited leaking hydrogen. Here's what probably happened. The Hindenburg had been flying through thunderstorms for hours. That builds up massive amounts of static electricity on the airship's skin. When the ground crew grabbed the wet mooring ropes, they created an electrical path to the ground. The static electricity needed to discharge to equalize. And it did, as a spark. Normally, that wouldn't matter. but one of the hydrogen cells in the tail section had developed a small leak. Hydrogen had been slowly escaping and accumulating near the outer skin. When the spark jumped, it found that pocket of hydrogen, ignition. At least, that's the most widely accepted theory. But it's not the only one. Some people believe sabotage. The Hindenburg was a Nazi symbol, and not everyone loved the Nazis. Could someone have planted a device? Some investigators found that possibility compelling, but no evidence was ever found. Others pointed to the airship's fabric coating. The Hindenburg's outer skin was treated with a mixture of cellulose, aluminum powder, and iron oxide materials that are individually flammable. Some researchers claimed this coating was essentially rocket fuel. A 2013 investigation even suggested the fabric coating, not the hydrogen, was the primary fuel for the fire. But most experts disagree. In 2021, a Caltech professor used modern computer modeling to simulate the disaster. His conclusion? Static electricity plus leaking hydrogen. The fabric coating certainly made the fire worse, but the hydrogen was the main culprit. We'll probably never know with absolute certainty. But what we do know is this: filling a passenger aircraft with 7 million cubic feet of flammable gas was a risk that eventually caught up with them. The Hindenburg disaster marked the end of the airship age. Instantly, permanently, catastrophically. Other airships were still flying when the Hindenburg burned. Germany had a sister ship, the Graf Zeppelin II. After the disaster, it never carried passengers again. Within 2 years, it was dismantled. The British had their own rigid airships. They grounded them immediately. Public confidence in airship travel evaporated overnight. Would you pay thousands of dollars to fly on a hydrogen-filled balloon after watching the Hindenburg explode on newsreels? Of course not. But it wasn't just about fear. Airplanes were rapidly improving. The Douglas DC-3, a reliable, relatively fast airplane, entered service in 1936, the same year as the Hindenburg. It couldn't cross the Atlantic yet, but it would soon. Airplanes were faster, cheaper, and didn't need millions of cubic feet of explosive gas. The Hindenburg disaster didn't kill airship travel, it just accelerated its inevitable death. Within a decade, passenger airships were extinct. Blimps would continue for advertising and surveillance, but the age of luxury rigid airships, the floating palaces, was over. The disaster also had a profound cultural impact. Herb Morrison's recording, "Oh, the Humanity," became one of the most famous pieces of audio in history. For decades, it was played in journalism schools as an example of raw, emotional reporting. Morrison himself was traumatized by what he witnessed. He said he never fully recovered from that day. The Hindenburg became a symbol of technological hubris, a symbol of the fragility of progress, a symbol of how quickly triumph can turn to tragedy. And yet, there's another side to this story. A side about resilience, about courage, about ordinary people doing extraordinary things in the face of unimaginable horror. Werner Franz, the 14-year-old cabin boy, lived to be 92 years old. He died in 2014, the last survivor of the Hindenburg disaster. For 77 years, he carried those memories. He gave interviews, spoke at memorials, and always emphasized how lucky he was to survive. Joseph Spey, the acrobat, returned to performing. He never spoke much about the disaster publicly, but his family said it changed him. He became more cautious, more aware of mortality. Captain Max Pruss survived his severe burns and eventually returned to work, though never as an airship captain. He spent the rest of his life defending the safety of airship travel and insisting the Hindenburg disaster was a tragic accident, not a design flaw. Many survivors struggled with what we'd now call post-traumatic stress disorder. They had nightmares. They couldn't stand the smell of smoke. They flinched at loud noises. But they also showed remarkable resilience. They rebuilt their lives. They had families. They grew old. And they never forgot the people who didn't make it. Every survivor carried the guilt of living when others died. Why did I survive when the person next to me didn't? That question haunted many of them forever. So, what can we learn from the Hindenburg disaster almost 90 years later? First, technology is amazing, but it's not infallible. The Hindenburg was a miracle of engineering. But miracles can fail. One small leak, one spark, one moment of bad luck, and everything changes. Second, human beings are capable of incredible courage. Those sailors and ground crew who ran into the flames didn't think about medals or recognition. They just saw people who needed help, and they acted. That's heroism in its purest form. Third, survival sometimes comes down to split-second decisions. The people who survived the Hindenburg made instant choices: jump now, run this way, don't hesitate. Those who froze, who waited, often didn't make it. And finally, life is fragile. Those passengers boarded the Hindenburg expecting a luxurious journey. They were drinking champagne and admiring the view. 37 seconds later, everything they thought they knew was gone. We should never take any moment for granted. The Hindenburg disaster remains one of the most documented catastrophes in history. We have film footage from multiple angles, we have audio recordings, we have survivor testimonies, and because of modern restoration technology, we can see it in color, in clarity that makes it feel like it happened yesterday, instead of 1937. It's not easy to watch. It's not pleasant to think about. But it's important, because those 36 people who died deserve to be remembered. The 62 who survived deserve to have their stories told. And all of us deserve to learn from history, so we don't repeat its mistakes. If this story moved you, if it made you think about courage, survival, and the unpredictability of life, then please hit that like button, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to this channel. We uncover the true stories behind history's most famous events. Stories that deserve to be remembered. Thank you for watching. Until next time, remember the past, honor those who came before us, and never stop learning.